fulfill its goal of development of the people of the country, especially for those who were socially and economically disadvantaged or backward groups of the community. So this was actually the framework which was going on, which was going on, that after India achieved its independence, these were the things which India would accomplish. But unfortunately, so together with independence, another horrible thing, which is independence was something which India and in its people desired for it, but they never thought that together with independence, something tragic, something very, very drastic was going to happen. That was partition. Together with independence was going to come in one of the most tragic incidents which had ever taken place in the history of India, was actually the partition of British India into two nations. That is, one would be known as India and another would be known as Pakistan. So independence brought with it three challenges. Three challenges before the leaders, before the country during the time of independence. Now, what were the three challenges which India confronted together with this particular event of independence, which India had long deserved or desired for? Now, the first challenge was what? The first challenge was to build up a united country. Not only a united country, a country which would be accommodating all diversities. Now, here in this respect, I will just like to explain one fact is that, India is a vast country. It is said to be of a continental size. Continental size means size of that of a continent, because there are continents which are quite equivalent to size to that of India. So a huge country, and not only that, not only in its territory expanse, India is also having huge diversities in it. So You find people in India speaking different languages, following different cultures, pursuing different religion, and there are people with existing within the country with so much of diversities in them. So the first question which came before the members were that, will India be formed into a united nation, accommodating all the diversities which existed within India? So this came as a big question, that this model of building a huge nation with adjusting and accommodating the diversities or the interests of all the groups of the people who were there in India, will India stand united? Will India exist? This was the greatest challenge in front of them. That because that time when the Britishers were ruling in India, there were so many groups of people living in different parts of the country, having so much of diversities in them. Not only diversities, they were having different aspirations, different expectations. So it was becoming quite, so this was a huge question in front of the members, the leaders of the nation, that will they be successful in creating a country which would stand united, accommodating all the differences which had existed or which were existing in the country. This was the big question, that even if they have created a model, they have created a united India, but how long will this exist? How long will they continue with this kind of a model, that is accommodating all the diversities which had existed within the country? So this came as a big challenge in front of them. Second was, India was to become a democratic country. As I've told you before, that India has faced 200 years of colonialism, 200 years of colonial exploitation, or imperial, they were under imperial rule. So under no grounds would they opt for another imperialism or colonialism or monarchical rule. So what they opted was a democratic government. And in this democratic government, this democratic government would be a representative democracy. Representative democracy means that the people of the country who would be given the right to vote, people having right to vote, they would choose amongst them. That means they will vote for the candidates or the parties from amongst them, and those who are going to choose representatives, those who are going to form the government. Together with that, India had also would be adopting a parliamentary form of government. Parliamentary form of government. So here you see that India would be turning into a democratic country with a parliamentary form of government, and this democracy would be representative democracy, and it would give to its people certain fundamental rights, and among this fundamental right, one would be the right to vote. That means India would be having a democratic setup, and within this democratic setup would take up the political competition. And what was this political competition? Political competition was elections. That for what? Forming the government. As we all know that India was a constitution was being made by the Constituent Assembly, and it was completed by 26th of November 1949, that India would be having a democratic constitution, but this democratic constitution was not enough to give a democratic character to India, because it was clear that this political competition which would be going on within the country would be taking place within a political democratic system, and so in not a democratic constitution would not be enough. So what you have to make up is a completely democratic system had to be framed. So only having a democratic constitution was not enough, you had to have a democratic setup. This was the second challenge. And the third challenge was so the third challenge which India would be facing immediately after independence was development of the people of the country. As I've told you that development would have been the second goal after India would develop itself into a democratic nation. The third challenge which India would confront in front of it was the development of the people of the country. Why? Because India has also provided for equality and special protection for the rights of the disadvantaged groups in the country. So this was there within the Indian Constitution, that special protection of the rights of the or interests of the disadvantaged groups, that is groups who had fallen, who were included within the poverty section groups of the country, would be given special priority. Together with that, India had adapted the provision of directive principles of state policy for developing India into a welfare state. So India was, after independence, third challenge which would come in front of it was for the development of the whole country. And this because India was having within its list of fundamental rights equality, right to equality, and special protection for all those people who belong to the disadvantaged groups, especially the poverty stricken people or the socially and educationally or economically backward groups. Special developmental measures should be taken for them, and together with that, India had also introduced the provision of directive principles of state policy, which was aimed at making India into a welfare state. So India had three challenges in front of it immediately after India had gained its independence from the British. The first challenge was that of building a nation, a unified nation, accommodating all the diversities in terms of language, culture, religion, whatever it existed within the country. Second was to not only to have a democratic country or a democratic constitution, but also to build up a thoroughly democratic setup. And the third one was what? For the goal of development especially not only for few sections of the people of the country, but for the whole section, whole of the country, especially the downtrodden of the country, those who belong to the disadvantaged groups or those who were poverty-stricken groups, because India provides for right to equality as enshrined in its group of fundamental rights, and together with that it had also taken up the principles of directive principles of state policy, which aimed at creating India into a welfare state. So these were the challenges. But in this chapter, you know, the whole book, the second book which I was talking about, that is Politics in India Since Independence, it is actually, this whole book is going to be dealing up with all the three challenges which I have just now talked about. But in this particular chapter, that is Challenges of Nation Building, you can get from the name itself that we are going to deal with the first challenge, that is where India would be immediately after independence, India would be developed into a unified country, a united nation, accommodating all the diversities. So in this chapter we will be dealing with the first challenge which the members or the leaders of the nation would be confronting with or combating with immediately after its independence. So as I've already told you that 14th to 15th of August midnight, when all the Indians were expecting that India would be gaining independence, but together with this independence, another thing which was going to come and which would be like, you know, going to be like something negative, something very destructive, something very miserable, something very what to say, like a jinxed for the people of India, which was actually partition. The same day. And the most unfortunate thing was that, you know, when partition was being planned, there were lakhs of people in India who were unprepared, who were unknown about this fact, that India, the so-called British India, is going to be divided into two separate nations. And unfortunately, this was said to be one of the most tragic incidents which the people of India has ever gone through. Why? Because people, those who were living nearby, you know, like close neighbors, like close families, irrespective of the huge diversities in religion or language, whatever existed that time, you know, they never felt like that. And so when immediately when this news came up that India was going to be divided, you know, it came like a thunderstorm upon the people of India, because they were prepared, neither they were willing, neither were they aware of such circumstances or such things which were being planned. So the idea of India being partitioned into two, British India, here we are talking about British India, that means India which was under the rule of the British during the period before independence, would be being partitioned into two nations, and this partition would be along religious lines, on the principle of religious majority. This partition would take place on the basis of religious majority, and it was this demand for partition was put forward by the Muslim League. It was said that, as we have seen in history books, that the Muslim League came up with the demand that after independence, the Muslims in India would be they would be in a minority, and so in order to protect them, their interests, according to the Muslim League, they wanted a separate nation for the Muslims, which would be known as Pakistan, and this demand was put by the members of the Muslim League. However, the Congress party, you know, it came into direct opposition against the demand of the Muslim League for the creation of a separate nation which would be known as Pakistan. So this was a very unfortunate phase when independence, when this long desired independence was coming up, and together with that another drastic thing was coming up for the people. It was partition, and this partition as a demand was put forward by the Muslim League, because they felt that in undivided India the Muslims would be in a minority and their demands, their interest would be suppressed by the majority, and so they placed the demand for a separate nation. However, they came into direct confrontation because the Congress was not at all supporting this view, but unfortunately they had to do so. So what did I tell you? That this division would be taking place on religious, the principle of religious majority. That means India, British India would be divided into two parts. One was India, that is for the Hindus, and another would be Pakistan, that is for the Muslims. That means here you can see that it was on the grounds of religious majority. That means division of nation would take place on religious grounds. So this particular thing, that yes, it's okay, we will be dividing India into on the religious grounds, it seemed to be very, very simple, but unfortunately this was as simple it seemed, it did not come out to be that easy as it would be, as people thought. There were a number of problems which came up. So as I've just told you that it was said that British India would be divided on religious ground. One would be belonging to the Muslims, that is Pakistan. One would be India, that is for the Hindus. So it's, as theoretically it seemed to be very, very simple, but in reality, in practice, it seemed to be very, very difficult. Why? There was no Muslim majority belt in India, as it was decided that this partition would take place on a religious ground. But unfortunately there was no Muslim majority belt in India, excepting two. One was Punjab, which was on the western side, northwestern side, and another one was Bengal, which was on the eastern side. So just imagine both the Muslim belts existing in two different parts of the country. So on the western part you have Punjab, which was going to be which was a majority belt for the Muslims, and another one was the Bengal, which was also another Muslim dominated region. But so in this way the decision was taken that this part, which was on the western part, it would be known as West Pakistan, together with India in between, huge expanse of Indian territory in between, and this part, which was another Muslim dominated area, which was actually known as Bengal, it would be known as East Pakistan. Imagine of one country stretching at two different ends, and with another country, that is India, in between. This was more or less how it was going to be designed. This was one problem. That means when you are creating Pakistan, you are not getting it together, because it was going to be divided on religious ground. So it was in India, there were only two religious belts. One was Punjab, one was Bengal, and unfortunately they were on two different ends of the country. And second one was what? The second problem was that many people, many Muslims, those who were living in India, they were not ready to become a part of Pakistan. And one of them, whose name was very famous, you have heard about, from the Northwest Frontier Province, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan. From Northwest Frontier Province, he was also known as Frontier Gandhi. He was not ready. He was from the Northwest Frontier Provinces. He protested against this, that they did not want it to become a part of Pakistan, which was going to be known to be a land of the Muslims. But unfortunately, their demands were not taken into, and Northwest Frontier Province was made a part of Pakistan. And the worst affected in this group was minorities on both sides of the border. There were many number of people, those who belong to both the parts of India as well as Pakistan, those who were minorities, those who were either Sikhs, those who were either Parsis or belonging to any other community. Now, to them, they felt like that we are part of which nation. Unfortunately, they were, even by 14th to 15th of August, when India was going to be divided, they had no idea that we belong to which nation, whether we are a part of India or whether we are a part of Pakistan, which part of the country we are going to belong, and which government is going to take up our responsibility. So we can see that the most badly affected by the minorities on both sides of the border. So it were these minorities after in the process of partition, you will come to see that how badly affected were the minority sections on both sides of the border, where the country where they have lived for so long, now they had become aliens in the country in a country in which their ancestors have lived for several of years, many decades. Now they were becoming aliens in that country, and they were finding no permanent residence or a citizenship of a country to which they should belong. And these were the problems which had come before the people when a demand for a separate nation was being made for the Muslims of the British India, and a separate nation was going to be formed, which was going to be known as Pakistan. So in this particular part, like small questions, short questions can come to you, as I've told you that who was Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, or who was also privately known as Frontier Gandhi. And we'll talk about one more thing, is that the two nation theory. The two nation theory, it was put up by the Muslim League. Two nation theory, and this two nation theory, it proposed for two nations. That means one for the Muslims, one for the Hindus. That is, British India would be divided into two areas, one for the Muslims and one for the Hindus. This is the two nation theory, which was actually proposed by the Muslim League in India. So we have seen that together with independence came up another very horrible picture for India, for the people of India. During that time, you can understand that India was going through such a horrible phase, a turmoil, a chaos, violence, that when India was going to get its dream of independence, and accompanying it was the partition. So this phase of entire 1947 was actually a period of turmoil, violence, chaos amongst all the people of India, and those who have lived that time. It was a year which was really to be remembered by them, and it was a area of political instability, unrest and violence for the country. And in the next class, I will start with the process of partition. Hope this has been helpful to you. Just go through the points. That means what were the challenges, what were the goals, what were the problems. You have to go like this, and short questions from between. In this way, the CBSE you can study in this way, so that you can get questions for your board examinations. That what were the goals which were kept before the freedom fighters, what were the challenges immediately after independence, and what were the problems for building up a separate nation, and small questions like who proposed the two nation theory, who was known as Frontier Gandhi, and things like that. Thank you. I suppose this would be helpful, and the next class I will start with the entire process of partition. Have a nice day.